Okay, I'm going to jump right into it. The Acolyte is now over, season 1 at least. And now that we have all of the data in front of us and on the table, I want to compare the Jedi and the witches. Are they cults? If so, which one is worse? Is one definitely worse? Because one of the biggest strains of backlash to the show is that it turns the Jedi into bad guys. So you see people over and over again online saying, no, the Jedi are the good guys. Real quick, we should say there's an unfortunate cultural bias where if a belief system, a way of life is big enough, it's not a cult. But if it's small enough, then it is. We won't make that mistake here. The Jedi aren't inherently better because they're infinitely bigger or more mainstream. First up, the Coven. They completely isolate themselves from the outside world, right? So they can do their own thing, worship in their own way. Is that good, bad, or neutral? I'm going to say neutral. It's a little concerning, but I'm going to say neutral. At least at first blush. They are ruled by one person and/or couple, right? This wife and wife, who act as the secular and religious leaders for the entire group, and they don't seem to share power in any way. It's an autocracy. There's no checks and balances. There's no greater council that they have to make proposals to that then accepts or rejects what these leaders want to do with the group. That's an unqualified negative. The married couple that's in charge of everything conceives children specifically to be the next set of rulers. Yeah, that's a negative, again, and a pretty big one. At least several of them are for the killing of outsiders who try to come in and do their job. Now, we can get into whether or not what the Jedi do with kids is good or bad, and we will when we get to them, but this is accepted in this universe, in this world. This is like Child Protective Services. The Jedi are allowed to show up and check on these children that they found and test them for midichlorian to see if they should be trained as Jedi, etc. And again, multiple of the witches are for murdering these people who are showing up to do the culturally accepted job, who aren't being violent, who haven't threatened violence in any way, etc. So, strong negative. Now, the head witch shuts that down and cooperates, so those are positives, but I think really for her and not the Coven. But that brings up a different point. People in this society are allowed to vocally disagree with the leader/leading couple, and they do so vehemently more than once in the episode. So, positive. Speaking of how the group operates, one important thing too is that they don't seem interested in trying to find or force or manipulate converts. And so that's another positive, and these are two things in a row that go against like the classic worst kind of cult, where the leader's authority is unquestioned, and where you're looking for vulnerable people that you can bring into the fold. But this is Star Wars, and these are Force users, and we're here to compare them to the Jedi. So how do they use their power? How do they use the Force? Oh, I'm sorry, the thread. I'm not here to review the show overall, but this is where the sloppy writing really hurts things. Honestly, one of the criticisms that the full-on haters, like the kind who call these people communist lesbian space witches, should level at the show, and I haven't seen anywhere, is that it was too ambitious, really. One of the central themes of the show is that people can see the same thing differently. Osha saw the fire starting in one way, May saw it in a completely different way, and then it turned out to be in a different way. Sol thinks he's saving the children from dark magic evil. The witches see it as Sol and the others trying to take away their kids, etc., etc. The problem is you still have to be consistent with your characters. So the show portrays the witches early on as very peaceful. Yeah, they're training for combative use of the thread, but still, it seems like for only self-defense, and they're just this peaceful commune. They even specifically preach against using the Force thread in a manipulative way as this utilitarian tool for your purposes. And so I would rate their Force use as a positive, even though it's completely outside of the mainstream and, disavowing what the Jedi teach, etc., mainstream society, except that later in the show they invade people's minds more than once, and it's a very intrusive thing, but far worse than that. The Jedi, they might force you to say the truth with their mind powers, but, force you to let them go through a checkpoint so you can get away from the bad guys, right? Like in A New Hope. But that's a world different from what the witches do when they force one Jedi to try to kill his friends. And self-defense is not an excuse for that, because it's still the way in which they use the Force thread, right? Like a Jedi would never develop that power. I'm going to manipulate someone into killing others for me. Invading, like full-on invading people's minds seems like a core power for the witches. But especially the forcing someone to kill others against their will thing. Yeah, definite negative in how they use it. And back to the quality of the writing, just for 2 seconds, that's not the point of the video. This is where you can't square the two different depictions of these same characters within the same season of the same show. They go directly against the teachings we see them imparting to their children. And if they hadn't tried to take on so many things in just 8 episodes, they might have done a better job of exhibiting the justification for the dichotomy. Now let's examine the Jedi. Let's be fair, they exhibit one of the absolute classic cult behaviors. Once they take you away, they insist you completely cut off everyone else from your life, including family. And there's a lot of in-universe, in-story defense of that, right? They're finding these people who have special powers and taking them away so they can learn how to use them properly so they don't go down the dark path, because if they do, that would be really, really bad for them and practically everybody else. And attachment is a whole part of that, so that's why you can't, talk to your family. But it gets pretty weird, because even my favorite Jedi of all time, Qui-Gon, and the rest of the Jedi don't seem to give a rip about the perfectly lovely and kind-hearted Shmi. Even if you accept the in-story logic on why Anakin can't, ever talk to his mother again, that he last saw when he was an 8-year-old boy, they leave her in slavery. That's cold, man. You're the Jedi, this huge organization. Couldn't you at least send somebody back later to buy her freedom? And they could have at least done that and let Anakin know, hey, you're never going to talk to her again, but we took care of her. She's okay. Anyway, I think, seems like some people don't get this, but I think it's very clear that the original trilogy shows Luke rejecting this and therefore proving that it's a negative. He is proven right. He rejects Yoda's and the Jedi's orthodox teaching about detachment. He was going to establish a new way, probably some kind of a hybrid. But anyway, the new way, and what he was going to do, that all got crushed by the Disney steamroller, along with his character. So even with the good reasons, the noble intentions, as Sol would say, that the Jedi do what they do, I'm saying negative. Classic cult behavior. Okay, but what else? The Acolyte makes the point that the Jedi insist people can only worship in their way, so to speak. But there does seem to be logic around that. This is not just worship God however you want versus worship him the way I tell you to. It's how you connect to the Force and you're trying to avoid the dark side and all that. And if you put this into a real-world context, it's bad, just flat out bad. No, you can only worship the way that me and my group say. But in the real world, people don't have superpowers. And in their defense, the Jedi are not just trying to teach you all these things to keep you from doing harm to others and whatnot, because you'd be a danger to society as a Sith. No, they're also trying to keep you from losing your soul. S-O-U-L. No pun intended. So this monopoly that they insist they have on teaching use of the Force, I'm going to be super fair, especially for a Gen Xer who loves the older Star Wars more than anything, and say neutral, despite all the justifications that are built into the Star Wars universe. And by the way, going back to removing children, we should point out that they ask, right? They only do that with permission. Still problematic. Anyway, let's talk about openness and integrating with society. The witches, remember, are completely isolated. That's usually a red flag. The Jedi, for all of their aloofness and disdain for civilian government interference, they do consent to it. They allow government oversight. It's a constant tug-of-war, it's messy, but that's how democracy works. And they never push for a theocracy. They never push to be in charge of everything. Yoda doesn't try to be the chancellor. Oh, I'm the wisest person here. I should just be in charge of everything. They do acknowledge that ultimately the will of the people should win. So, government can be a bad word, but those are the people's elected representatives watching over the Jedi. They allow it, and they don't have to. They could just take over. So, positive. Like the witches within the Jedi Order, you're allowed to verbally dissent. We've seen that. It might not be appreciated, but you can do it. More importantly, in a classic anti-cult behavior, anyone who wants to leave just can. There's the door, and best of luck to you, and that's a positive. Ultimately, I think it's fair to say the Jedi try to use their power for good. They might bungle it up here and there, they might have internal cover-ups and whatnot, but they really do try. They choose to dedicate their lives to keeping the peace, to trying and keeping as many people as possible safe. However flawed the implementation might be, they truly do try to do the best they can for society in general, for others, not just for themselves. And doing that is a royal pain. It would be so much easier to just go off and be by themselves, worship the Force, try to commune with it, defend themselves if anybody does try to mess with them. But basically, good luck to the rest of y'all. Neither the Jedi nor the witches try to use the power to conquer, like the Sith. But only the Jedi teach you have this special power and you should spend the rest of your life using it to help others. The witches do not do that. The show throws a lot of head fakes, so we're not 100% sure. They're obviously not as bad as the Jedi, especially Soul, thought they were. One of the twins says something about everybody's going to be sacrificed. Well, I would guess that's nowhere near as bad as it sounds. But we just don't have the information. We can't say one way or another yet. What we can say is the witches are only in it for themselves, have no mandate to help anyone outside of their group. Everyone's purpose is to serve the group. Children are conceived solely for that reason. Many of them, at least, are okay with murdering people who try to pop their bubble, not to come end their existence, but just to, enter in, break the privacy. The Jedi would never do that. They're not going to plot to assassinate some of the meddlesome politicians that are coming in and doing their job. And in terms of use of magic, if you will, the witches are okay with using it in a dark way, right? They go all in on invading others' minds, forcing someone to kill, and not just that, but kill their friends. That's pretty messed up when you think about it. So they will use the Force or thread in a purposefully dark way, and again, just for their own purposes, not in the cause of a greater good. And so, from what I can see anyway, and trying to be as objective as possible, both groups have their problematic aspects for sure, but the Jedi are actually far, far better. A cult, by definition, does not integrate itself with mainstream society, allow outsiders in, or allow people to leave it freely. The witches, meanwhile, are a cult. Now, they're not the worst kind of cult, but they are one. They choose to self-isolate so they can work on this weird pet little project. They don't ask kids, do you want to come join this? I know they're still kids, but at least the Jedi ask. No, they birth kids solely for this purpose. They're indoctrinated from minute one. The twins are never going to be given a choice. It only happens because the Jedi intrude. And they have no power sharing. The Jedi are pretty hierarchical, but there is a actual council that weighs matters. It's not just Yoda at the top and everyone else, or, Yoda and his husband, and then everyone else below them taking orders. And again, most importantly, if you think about it, they even share power with the outside world. They give power to the Republic, a government that they don't really have to. And that really means with the people at large. Look at the prequels. They'll even take direct orders from the civilian head. So there's actually no competition here. The Jedi are way, way better, and the witches are a cult, and the most mollifying factors in the cult's favor are all exceptions to the rule. It's that the Mother Superior just got guilty. She spells it out. She chose to be a good mother over her role as cult leader. She went against everything they're working towards. And in the hands of much better writers, by the way, that could have been a really interesting story arc. That's the video. Thanks.